Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to follow up on your answer there about Russia and Ukraine. When you were in Geneva in June, you said to us about President Putin, I think the last thing he wants now is a Cold War. Now, since then, of course, you've seen him gather these troops, 100,000 troops around Ukraine. Your Secretary of State said today he thought he could invade it at any moment. You've seen the cyber attacks. And you've seen the demand that he have a sphere of influence in which you would withdraw all American troops and nuclear weapons from what used to be the Soviet bloc. So I'm wondering if you still think that the last thing he wants is a Cold War. And has your view of him changed in the past few months? And if it has, and he does invade, would your posture be to really move back to the kind of containment policy that you saw so often when you were still in the Senate?
The answer is that I think he still does not want any full-blown war, number one. Number two, do I think he'll test the West, test the United States and NATO as significantly as he can? Yes, I think he will. But I think he'll pay a serious and dear price for it that he doesn't think now will cost them what it's going to cost.
Iran has been holding naval exercises with Russian and Chinese ships. The drills are taking place in the northern Indian Ocean. Tehran says the operation aims to strengthen security in the region, as well as combating piracy and reinforcing the safety of maritime trade.
This is Ezekiel Chapter 38, verse 1, and it reads, And the word of Yahweh came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshach and Tubal, and prophesy against him. Call halal Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai Ba'ashem Rakakwadash. Double honors unto the elders and apostles of Great Millstone. Salutations to the election. Shalom Yasharallah. So the prophecies are heating up and are definitely coming to pass. The United States, under the leadership of Joe Biden, has found itself once again in a most compromising position. Let's be honest, under Trump, World War III wasn't going to play out as speedily as the warmongers of the Republic might hope. Matter of fact, he was dead set against armed conflict against Russia because in his time in office, his ideology was America getting back to its roots of manufacturing and finding strength in commerce. So he understood the economics, usually the sentiment shared by most CEOs, which is exactly what Donald Trump is and was. He is a 100% businessman, moonlighting as a politician, which, when truly you look at it, it's hard to differentiate. In any event, anybody who commands an economically viable entity knows that it costs money to go to war, and usually when you're engaged in battle, to be said in the most simplest of terms, if money is going out, there is no money coming in. Those funding the war get rich. Those engaged in the war get killed. Nevertheless, making America great again was about returning to Reaganomics. I'm a 70s baby, so, I went through it with Reagan in all his splendor and glory. Basically, it was about securing the money supply to reduce inflation, reduce taxes, the Fed and capital gains, reduce government regulation, and reduce growth of government spending. Let's not forget what it did to so-called black economic mobility, but that in itself is another lesson. In any event, Senior Trump was about his paper, and he knew Russia made most of its money by oil exports. The imposing of Western sanctions after Moscow annexed Crimea in 2014 caused Russia to do what? Reduce its dollar holdings, weakening the petrodollar, which was counterproductive to the U.S. economy and its potential to grow. The petrodollar is simply U.S. dollars paid to oil exporting countries for the sale of oil as a commodity. The benefit there is something called petrodollar recycling, I believe, which promotes non-inflationary growth. What does inflation do? Well, inflation reduces the value of the dollar's purchasing power. In layman's terms, the higher the inflation, the less bang for your buck. I remember being 8 years old and getting a bag of chips and a bottle of soda for 48 cents. Now, man, forget about it. Let's read Ezekiel 38:2 again. And it says this: Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him. Now, Gog and Magog is the land belonging to Noah's son, Japheth. Japheth is father to Gomer, Magog, Madai, Tyrus, Javan, Mishal, and Tubal. And you can find that genealogy in Genesis, the 10th chapter. The Medes of the Medo-Persian Empire were descendants of Japheth, who were a dark-skinned people. The name Japheth, meaning enlarged, open, the he being Yahweh, extends, as in to make spacious, abundant, and wide. When you go through the history, the first place Alexander the Great and his stock of Edomites took over after conquering the Medo-Persian Empire in quest to their inhabiting Europe was Greece, coming out of the land of Kittim. The Japhites already had kings that were ruling in Greece. Japheth is the antiqual father to the Minoans and the Etruscans. I suggest you brothers do your research. Present day, the people of Japheth speak to those who inhabit the South Pacific region, the so-called Samoans, Polynesians, the Tongans, the Fijians, and the Hawaiians. Tubal, once known as Asia Minor, is now known as Turkey. The meaning here in Ezekiel 38:2 is Russia and Turkey would be confederate with, meaning stand with each other. But the territory of Gog and Magog itself is recognized today as Russia. As I said, the U.S., in regards to Joe Biden's recent statements about a disaster awaiting Russia and Russia paying a heavy price if invaded the Ukraine, has the U.S. in an unfavorable predicament, to say the least. We in the truth already know how that story is going to play out, but I'd be remiss if I didn't point out the M.O.T.B, the mark of the beast, i.e. taking of the RFID microchip, being made mandatory, has to play out before the end comes. Intermede, the whole song and dance regarding Babylon's, i.e. America, its affiliate, present-day Israel, NATO, and its EU allies, demise at the hand of the Soviet Union and her contemporaries continue. Let's go to Ezekiel 38:3. And say, thus says the Lord power Yahweh, behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, which speaks to Turkey, a NATO ally, and the sanctions it faced at the hands of the U.S. under Trump, I believe, causing Turkey, who was appointed as the head of the military arm of NATO, even though Turkey touches no part of the Atlantic, all the military hardware and control centers were moved and placed under their supervision. Since being sanctioned by the U.S., Turkey's ties to Russia and Iran, NATO adversaries, has grown. However, never lose sight of the fact that, matter of fact, let's go to Jeremiah 49:20. And it reads, Therefore hear the counsel of the Lord Yahweh, that hath taken against Edom, and his purposes that he hath purposed against the inhabitants of Teman. Surely the least of the flock shall draw them out. Surely he shall make their habitations desolate with them. The Israelis and the Turks, being they are both of Khazarian stock, meaning they are essentially of the house of Edom, comes to mind. They both, being few in number, as a nation, can be responsible for starting the war of all wars in Armageddon, as it speaks to this verse here in Jeremiah 49:20. Bashar al-Assad, who is said to be Syrian but could very well be from the line of Edom. Erdogan, president of Turkey, the Saudi royal family, not the Saudi Arabians per se, who are Arabs, Arab meaning a mixture of nations. Specifically, the House of Saud are directly crypto-Jews, meaning they are from the seed of Amalek, and ergo, Amalek being the present-day so-called Jewish stock. They all are kin, being they all are Edomites. And so what you're witnessing is infighting amongst the house, with allied nations being incorporated on both sides. America is being drawn out by Israel because it was Israel, i.e. Amalek, who initially desired to destabilize the Syrian region and then go to war with Iran for what? You guessed it, oil. 90% of Israel's oil intake came from Iranian resources. And because those that sit in high positions over the American government dictate what military action should be taken to secure their interests are Zionists. Look that word up. They believe the 1948ers who are in the land of what is called Israel today are the chosen people, and the other nations are Goyim. They have designated themselves as Israel's protector and ergo are responsible for doing all the heavy lifting, so to speak. America is being drawn out by Turkey because of the arsenal of arms in present-day Turkey's possession and the leverage it holds with having its drones and, more importantly, nuclear arms. As I said, Turkey being sanctioned by the U.S. causes it to develop greater ties with Russia, Iran, and their allies, despite the standing in NATO. We know Thiemann to be speaking of the Germans, who are not only the mad scientists and the facilitators of nuclear as well as biological and chemical weaponry that lend to the strength of aggression for all parties considered. To date, their relationship with the U.S. has taken a slight turn as the now German chancellor turned down an invite to discuss the so-called Ukraine crisis we see unfolding before our eyes for obvious reasons. Mainstream media paints it as a scheduling conflict, but that in itself remains to be seen. Worthy enough to make mention, though, is the inhabitants of that region today, which is said to be Ma'an in Jordan, which has close relations with Turkey. Turkey and Jordan are both majority-ran Sunni Muslim nations and, quote-unquote, share common concerns over the status of present-day Jerusalem, and have constantly criticized Israel's overact in the city, lending to the conundrum of loyalty brewing. As you read through the prophecy, you come to understand the understanding that Turkey will leave NATO to join the Russian, China, and Iranian Confederation. Canadian Special Forces has been deployed to Ukraine. Canada itself has loaned the Ukraine $120 million, and I believe Venezuela as well as Cuba are being included in Russia's military drills, which speaks to war being imminent, based on the, of course, the hatred of American control, greed, and its international occupations with its military forces aligned on every border across the world. I believe there are 800 and counting. Let's jump down in the chapter, because really this isn't about a breakdown of the entire 38th chapter of Ezekiel. It's about bringing you up to speed and understanding what all the brouhaha is about you see playing out in today's mainstream media. Ezekiel 38:9. Thou shalt ascend and come like a storm. Thou shalt be like a cloud to cover the land. Thou and all thy bands and many people with thee. Meaning, Russia and its allies will engage the West in conflict. It is inevitable, and the Most High Power, Yahweh, has spoken it. The West, particularly the EU, desire control over the Ukraine government. Why? It's been the theme throughout this lesson. So they can run their pipeline supplying Europe with oil, consequently bypassing Russia, who are not at all blind to the fact that Ukraine membership in the EU means a wall of allied Westerners that restricts their access to the Black Sea. The Black Sea is important to Russia for operational strategic command of their navy and the transit of goods and energy. To date, the West has had a lot of influence over the Ukraine Congress and leadership because of all the money invested into it by the EU and the Clinton Foundation, pursuant to said pipeline. In 2014, it came to a vote in the Ukraine on whether or not they were going to join the EU or continue their ties with Russia. The bought and paid for puppets in the Ukraine decided to join NATO and the EU, but the legally elected president used his right to veto the decision. When he did that, the U.S. did what they are famous for doing and destabilizing a region. The CIA and the other foreign intelligence agencies started wreaking havoc, causing chaos to trigger the populace of Ukraine. Hence the era of conflict brewing, primarily Russia's need to preserve its mobility. Now keep in mind the Ukraine has a very large Russian national population along their eastern borders, the annexed Crimea region. Ezekiel 38:10. Thus saith the Lord power Yahweh, it shall also come to pass that at the same time shall things come into thy mind, and thou shalt think an evil thought. speaking to Magog, the Russians. The spirit will be put on the Russian leadership to wage war on America and its allies, which will trigger World War III. And you see that developing and playing out now. The conundrum that has presented itself, if all the attention diverted to prevent a Russian invasion, leaves China a far better opportunity of running up into Taiwan and vice versa, while Iran, who has promised the death of their revered general Qasem Soleimani must be avenged, sits on the sidelines. For those of you who watch the channel, the last two videos we directly and indirectly went into the evil spirit that the Lord solicits on the left-hand side to carry out his will. This spirit of hate between NATO, the EU, and Russia has been brewing for a very long time. Let's go to Revelation 3 briefly, just to bring that out. And it says this, "And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world wondered after the beast. And this deadly wound was healed, meaning the Roman Empire regained its power and continued its reign by the European nations, along with the USA and Canada, of course, coming together as allies, forming NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, in 1949. Founded by the U.S., NATO is an assembly of military might gathered to ensure protection from what? The threat of military might and attack by Russian forces. We know that it is prophesied NATO will be responsible for the whole world receiving the M.O.T.B, the mark of the beast, those whose names are not written in the book of life. So these things here have to play out. Let's close with this. This is Ezekiel Chapter 38. We'll go to 16. And it reads, "And thou shalt come up against my people of Israel," meaning the modern day land of Israel, "as a cloud to cover the land," speaking to the chariots and the thermonuclear missiles, pursuant to Zephaniah 1 and 14 and 15. "And it shall be in the latter days, and I will bring thee against my land, that the heathen may know me," meaning the land of Israel must be destroyed, cleansed by fire, as it has been defiled by the heathen, where they sit today and they think it more prudent to kosher pork and kosher cigarettes and sanction gay parades rather than obeying the Heavenly Father. Why? Because they are not the people. "When I shall be sanctified, Salakia, in thee, O Gog, before their eyes," meaning when Yahweh uses the Russians to bring about his judgment, his name, Yahweh B'Shem Yahweh Shai, will be magnified. Again, I must stress that the end is not yet until the prophecy of the M.O.T.B makes manifest. And with that, I say, Call halal Yahweh B'Shem Yahweh Shai B'Shem Makakwadash. Double honors unto the elders and apostles of Great Millstone who teach it's 100% truth and will rule well. Salutations to the hopeful elect. Remember, no test, no yab, and damn sure, don't take that chip. Shalom Yasharala. Kwam Yasharala Wa Abba Ball.